lighting and the rotation worked well, and that students would be able to see the height.
Yeah, the height was the issue. You have students, some of the students who were in the low 5 foot range, and then you had several students. I know in my class period, and then the following class period also, there were several students who were well over 6 feet tall. So designing the sun, if you will, to be able to move up and down to adjust to the height of that person was an issue. But we overcame pretty good with those.
And stabilizing those lights, keeping them to where they did not fall over and injure students was quite a good task.
Yeah, it's much like the sun, those lights were pretty hot. So.
As far as the student interaction with one another went, we didn't use whiteboarding as the specific method. We went with more of a think, pair, share idea. And after they got done with the lab and they came back to the classroom and got in their desks, and we had them predict what was going to happen at each of the other moon phases that they did not get to see, they were able to do that by getting together in groups and looking at each other's lab work, and then getting together with the think, pair, share idea to come up with the answers, or it was more or less predictions, because I know and when I did it, there a lot of times they would get the waning and the waxing backwards. So I know waning, waxing, they got backwards. Sometimes they're flip-flops. Full moon, new moon, a lot of times look the same.
Yeah.
It was almost if the left side of the sphere was shadow, they would shade the right side on their paper.
Yeah.
And I think I saw that throughout all class periods.
Yeah, they kind of got confused on what to shade and what not to shade, what was back. The waning and the wax, like you said, kind of got them a little confused. But where that came in good was where they would go and do it, then come back and think about it. They made their predictions. You know, they would take their 3 phases that they actually saw, then make predictions on the remaining phases. And then when they came back together to share, they could say, "Oh, well, wait a minute, you know, I predicted it would look like this, but you actually saw it, and I had it backwards." So it helped correct a lot of the misconceptions right off the bat.
And having them work in groups like that allowed us to go around, I think, and address each group and kind of do more small group instruction and address the waning and the waxing issues. I know Ms. Pohl really wanted us to hit that hard. So I felt like they got a better understanding of what that was by comparing their lab work to the groups.
Jeremy, you also, the original, they had the PowerPoint pictures of the moon phases, and you brought in that iPad app. Can you talk about that a little bit?
To bring technology into it, I was looking on my tablet. I found a moon phases app. The cool thing about it, you could select the date. It would show you the moon. So what we selected the date, the teach, and it would show us the moon. And we were able to actually manipulate the phases just by running our finger over the moon, over the screen on the tablet, and we were able to do more of an assessment towards the end of class. We would show maybe a waning crescent, ask the students what they thought it was. You would get, majority of they were getting it right. You did have a little group discussion where they might have got the waning and waxing backwards again. But we chose to do that instead of going with the typical PowerPoint pictures of a crescent moon. It was a little more interactive, and I think the students really enjoyed that part.
We took that tablet, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We took that tablet, Jeremy, it was a really cool app. We stuck it under the document camera. The Elmo, I can't remember exactly what hers was, but we stuck it under the document camera. You could zoom in, and when we got it, I thought it was pretty cool as the kids walked in the classroom, and it was on the smart board, it was brought up. So look, there's this big moon sitting there, and then when you manipulate it just by sliding across, and the students could actually, we talked about this later, having students come up and manipulate it so that they could see the changes, and then the class could see it as well. It's just, you know, a touchscreen app. It was pretty neat.
What was the general structure of the original cookbook lab? How did you modify the original structure for your new lesson? Example, what did you keep the same? What did you change? How did you rearrange it? What did you add? What was the hardest part about converting the cookbook lab? We've covered
changed everything.
Yeah, I say we changed everything, and I mean, I think we've already been through all that.
Yeah, the only thing that we didn't change was the overall objective that Ms. Pullman had given us to start with. Outside of that, the lab looked nothing like it did when we first started.
what 4 practices did we incorporate into our lesson?
I think we definitely incorporated planning and carrying out investigations. With the planning, I think it was a little bit more, there was a little bit more direction from us as teachers because we had to follow a model given by our teacher. But students we did still ask questions about what the materials were in the lab, like what does the lamp represent, what does the styrofoam ball represent, to get them involved in sort of planning that. And then, of course, the students did carry out their investigations. They went in the lab and held up the moon and had phases at each lab station, and they recorded what they saw at each lab station. So they definitely did carry out the investigation, and they were responsible for that.
Another practice would have been the analyzing and interpreting the data. They had to take what they did in the lab as individuals, come back and use their prediction, use that to analyze what they found and then make their predictions. And then they had to come together in their groups again and then analyze what they found versus what they predicted versus what was actually saw by the other members of the group, and then determine where they went from there.
And another one we used was developing and using models, because they were given the lamp, and then of course they had themselves, and they were given their little moon on a stick for their model of the moon, and they were, told that they needed to find out the different moon phases, and they only had those supplies, so it only made sense that they would set up, sun, moon, and earth for their models, and it kind of goes with the carrying out investigations that Kelsey talked about, where they use their models to carry out their investigation to figure out what would happen next and what would happen at each station that was there and what all the phases would look like.
Also, the use of mathematical and computational thinking. In our elaboration, we had asked the students to figure out how long approximately each moon phase would last. And, they'd have to use some thinking and basically come up with, what is 29.5 days divided by 8, or 27.5 solar days divided by 8, however you looked at it, to come up with, right around 3 days each moon phase would last.
So what level of teacher or student directiveness did we plan for?
Well, I think, according to our practices, the 4 that we listed previously were all really student-directed. However, I'd say, the other 4 practices that we didn't list were more teacher-directed. So I would give us a grade of somewhere probably in the middle. We use both techniques.
I think so too, and I think it would have been more student-centered had we been able to have more freedom to do kind of a more inquiry model of what we wanted to do, rather than having to comply with the restrictions that we were given at the school.
I think the learning aspect, what the students had to grasp as far as meeting their objectives, that was all more student-driven, and them going out on their own and figuring it out. Teacher-wise, I think we kind of had to probe them to pull the information out of them a little bit, or to kind of take care of some of the misconceptions they had. But, for the most part, the students really discovered, their objectives.
The lab was more teacher-driven because we, told them what they needed to do, but as far as like their predictions and stuff, they came up with what they thought the rest of the phases would look like and how they thought the rest of it would go. So that part of it was really student-driven.
Yeah.
The first part of it might have been more teacher-driven.
I agree. Going back to what I said earlier, I think the planning was a little more teacher-driven than the rest of it, but definitely the students in the lab was student-driven. They did the figuring out.
Kelly brought up kind of a good point. When they were in doing their own predictions, and even when they went back and do the comparisons, we really just kind of left them on their own with that. We'd walk around and ask and see, what the misconceptions were. And I know one question I asked, I heard some others asking too, were what phases are we having difficulty with? Or did all the phases match up in your predictions? And when you leave them there to make their own predictions and analyze, that's really student-driven. The question kept coming up, was this right? And I wouldn't answer the question. I would let within their group answer their question. And so it was student-driven in the fact that they had to figure out if it was right for themselves until we got to the end, and then, of course, to lead them through right, give them the answers.
Elaborate.
Yeah.